And I just wanted to sort of share that I will be transitioning out of the organization currently. And I wanted to introduce the person who will be hosting the webinars now on for Atma. So Devina Nigam, maybe you could just sort of wave for us to know. Devina is my colleague from Atma. She has been a consultant and is managing partnerships at Atma. She has a bachelor's degree in history from Delhi University and completed her post-graduation in human capital management from XLRI Jamshedpur. She has about 10 years of really rich human resource experience. And yeah, we're really excited for her to sort of take over the webinar for us from me. So yes, moving on to the topic, I just wanted to, so I think the reason we chose to discuss about this topic today was that the COVID situation has already presented us with several unique issues. And one such major issue that we've seen is that a lot of children have missed their education over the past years. What this means is not just that they've missed out on new learning, but they've also sort of gone back a step in education outcomes from the past because of, just lack of practice for them. The Teach for India team is one of the many organizations that has done brilliant work in just making sure that their programs were set in a way to sort of work towards this issue, right? And therefore, we have Nalika Braganza from TFI, who is here to talk to us about how TFI worked through bridging this gap with children. Nalika has, Nalika is the program director at TFI, and over her time at Teach for India, she has helped train and support close to 2,000 teachers who have impacted 10,000 students in the city of Mumbai and beyond. I just want to recap a few basic rules for the webinar today. All attendees, please stay muted through the webinar. We'll try and have enough time to have Q&A section at the end. Of course, as and when you have any questions that arise, please feel free to put it in the chat box and we'll keep a track of it and ask those questions. Please keep a pen and paper to make any notes that you need. Of course, we will share the presentation and like the recording of the webinar at the end of this session. So we will share that recording with everybody. And yes, I think I would like to now hand the space over to Dhanashree, who is a student of TFI. She's studying in 10th standard. She has a Teach for India she's a Teach for India student for about 7 years now, and is also a kids education revolutionary. She strongly believes in student participation and reimagining education in partnership with students. So hi Dhanashree, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for being available to talk to us.
Yes, this is a great pleasure to be here in this space. And yeah, I will today talk about how the pandemic has impacted education as a whole and has made a huge impact on us as students. So I think it's been a very transitioning period where everything shifted and the pandemic struck. We were all confused that how will we continue our learning, and everything was very uncertain. But then our online classes started. We started exploring more about virtual learning, exploring the resources, and at the same time I saw that a lot of students weren't able to continue their studies due to a lot of reasons, like unavailability of devices, and then connectivity issues. And also we have teachers who don't aren't really equipped with resources and the knowledge to teach online. So I think that is also there. So all this is happening now as well, and a lot of students have missed their learning for the past days. And I like as we all know, the statistics show that dropout rates in India have been drastically increasing. Plus, the malnutrition and everything is increasing a lot. And I think one of the main reasons is our schools are shut. Schools were like one of the main place where students used to get nutrition. That might be a meal once a day. So that got spotlighted for me every time. But like I feel really fortunate being a TFI student, as I was able to continue my learning and explore more online. Like I got the opportunity to meet people all around the world and interact with them, learn from them, and also um, share ideas, start new projects, do a lot of things at once, join new spaces like this one, which might not be possible if this was in person. So I think that's the boon of virtual spaces that is existing. Um, but unfortunately, there are huge gaps that still prevail, and there is a lot of inequity in education, um, which is why not everyone is getting that opportunity to continue their learning, and have a safe space where they can learn. Also, this pandemic has affected the mental health, the physical health, basically the social emotional um, aspect of kids, because at the time where the basic meals aren't available, shelter isn't available, people need to migrate to villages. At this time, the priority for the family is those meals, is that shelter, and not education. And that's sad. So like I wish that we are able to somewhere bring in more and more students to classroom, and help them in every way possible. And also, like I was able to adapt to this model very quickly. Like I had issues at the start, but then I did well during that. But I saw a lot of friends who struggled through this, because not everyone is that adaptable, and not everyone could do that. So a lot of kids still face problem in comprehending what is being taught in the online lectures, or are facing problem to pay attention to the teacher, or don't know the basics itself, like don't know the basics of reading and writing. Especially the kids belonging to the younger grades, they are facing a lot of problems, like in comprehending, because that physical touch has somewhere just vanished. So that is the reason we still have a lot of problems to be tackled. But at the brighter side, it has brought a lot of opportunities for us, like blended learning. Yeah, and I would like to end here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dhanashree. Thank you so much for being available to talk to us and share about the experiences that sort of represent the children of India right now, right? I would like to hand it over to Nalika, who will tell us a little bit about what TFI did and what were the thought processes that sort of went through TFI programs to, bridge this learning gap that's happening with children.
Thank you, Prerna. And thank you, Dhanashree, so much. Am I audible? Avija, Devina, could you give me a thumbs up if I'm audible? All right, great. Thank you. Right, so I think Devisha's, Dhanashree's set this up really, really beautifully. She's given us a little bit of context of what it's been like to be a student in the virtual world during the pandemic. I was telling Dhanashree yesterday when I heard her speak, because we had a call yesterday to prep, and I was like, Dhanashree, you're really, really articulate, really clear. It's so beautiful to be able to hear and to be able to experience and understand what you've been through. And at the same time, something that I can definitely share is that at Teach for India, we have students who are far behind where Dhanashree is in terms of learning levels, in terms of ability to speak, articulate, read, comprehend, do basic math, numeracy, etc. And so today, what I am sharing is some of the measures, some of the programs that we put in place to actually support our students who are struggling the most and who've been hit the worst by the pandemic. Yes, because of their ability to adapt, but also because of the opportunities that they've had, because of the access that they've had to devices, etc. There have just been multiple factors. Now with that, I'm going to share my screen. For the next 20 minutes or so, I will take you through a couple. So like Grena mentioned, my name is Nalika. That's a picture of me with my kids. I taught grades 3 and 4 in 2012. I was a Teach for India fellow myself. And I taught literacy, math and social studies. As an elementary teacher. You pretty much teach everything. But my love for reading in particular and teaching reading has come from there. Today, what we're going to be exploring, a couple of things. So one, just why we found the need for the bridge curriculum at Teach for India. That's the first thing. We've already heard from Dhanushree. We've heard a story from Dhanushree. We're going to go into a little bit of data. We'll skim through that quickly, and then we'll move into what the bridge curriculum really is. So what are the goals? What are some of the design principles? I will also share some artifacts and samples. Now, this is the part of the presentation that may be a little bit detailed. So if you're somebody who's working with curriculum, it may be really interesting. And if you're somebody who's working at a slightly more zoomed out lens, you can ask me questions about what I'm sharing if it gets too minute. And along with that, I will share an example of what this actually looks like in action. I'm doing that because I think sometimes when we hear principles, they make sense, but then I find it a little bit hard to then translate it into action. So I'll show one example as we move along. So starting off with why the need for the bridge curriculum, I'm sure almost everybody on this call has at some point gone through some research, some statistics that show how far behind our kids are currently and how far they're going to be when they finally come back to schools, come back to physical classrooms, right? A particular study by UNESCO actually stated that Indian children face up to 1.5 years of learning loss. India is one of the countries that has been shut down for the longest time, where schools have been shut down for the longest time, 69 weeks and counting. And keeping this in mind, something that we thought of is even before schools formally reopen, what do we do to support our children? At Teach for India, our trajectory has been such that when the pandemic hit last year, I still remember the first thing that we asked was, okay, how do we transition our kids online? That was the first question. But as we started interacting with parents very early on, like the first 2 weeks, we realized that actually what they needed at that point, the biggest need was not learning. It was just access to basic things. A lot of them had lost their jobs. I was in Mumbai at the time. A lot of our families had to move back to places where they had come from because they just couldn't afford to stay there, right? And so our first, something that we began to work on early was just ration and relief. We moved from around 72% of our children having access to basic ration and relief to around 96 in a couple of months. And this was just through relief efforts, a lot of NGOs supporting us, etc. Then we moved on to access. Do we have access to every child, and does every child have access to a learning device? We did try initially to think of different ways for students who did not have a device. So we said, okay, let's print worksheets and get it to them in some form or the other, but that just became very difficult. So we went with actually procuring devices for students, donating devices, fundraising for devices. And then we looked at attendance and engagement. You can see the number here is slightly lower. So it was 69% of students attending online classes by the end of the year and engaging with homework asynchronously. These are the two things. And then lastly, something that actually took a hit despite everything else that we did is learning, because our biggest efforts were put into getting kids to class, What we stopped focusing on as much was what are they actually learning once they come to class. And that was for multiple reasons, right? When a fellow or a teacher is spending so much time calling, asking, what do you need? Do you need food? Do you need a device? Spending time saying, how can I just get this child to class? Their focus on learning and mastery actually fell. And so that's something that took a hit. Across the board, we had around 40% of our students make some growth in the year, which is very, very limited to what we generally have. And so keeping that in mind, we put in place the bridge curriculum. We actually began the bridge curriculum about 6 weeks ago. So 6 weeks ago it was launched, and we had worked on it before that. From studies across like global institutions, what we learned is that there are 3 really big principles, very simple ones, but very important ones to keep in mind while bridging the gap. First one is prioritizing content. Our students are going online, trying to learn English, math, science, geography, history. There was just so much to learn and so little time to learn it that we said, how do we reduce the content and prioritize very specific things? The second thing is increasing learning time. Our students started off getting about an hour of learning online, and that was because data packs were getting over, the internet was getting cut, different things like that. They weren't in the habit of learning independently. We gradually built that up to now them getting around 18 to 21 hours of instruction in the week. So that was the target. The third principle is decrease the ratio. Now, I've not said teacher to student ratio, I've just said ratio, right? The ratio of anybody who's supporting the child. So whether it's a teacher, a volunteer, a parent, another child supporting the child, but decreasing that ratio so every child gets a little bit of individual attention. Our goal was for the 3 months starting 6 weeks ago, that all of our students who are struggling in particular will make 0.5 years of growth. So double the rate that they would otherwise grow at. Now I'm going to get into choices that we made. There are 4 big things that I'm going to talk about, and that's actually all I'm sharing today. I will share the choice that we made. I will show an example. So first, our most fundamental choice was, what are we going to teach students? We chose to focus on language, math, and social-emotional learning. Social-emotional learning, because like Ghanshri mentioned, a lot of our students were just cooped up in really tiny houses for really long periods of time. It was extremely unsafe. They needed a place to learn how to regulate emotions, how to express themselves, things like that. So we chose SEL. We picked language because what we believe is, even when we're teaching subjects like history, geography, we can teach it through language. And so we wanted to make sure that our students who could not read independently were able to do that. So that was our big focus, because what we realized is, especially online, if you're learning virtually, one of the most important skills you need to have is to be able to read independently. Otherwise, you're completely dependent on a call or a Zoom space to learn. And the last was math, just basic numeracy for all of our students to come back with. So our first principle was that a child's learning level matters more than their grade. We have a couple of bridge curriculums that have been released by the state, and I know that they're still reworking them. But what we noticed was that each grade was given a specific bridge curriculum. What we know is that in every class, we have different levels of students, right? And so what we chose to focus on is to say, it doesn't matter what grade you're in, we're going to focus on what learning level you're at. So for example, in a grade 5 classroom, I might have kids at a level 1, 2, 3, etc. We have levels 1 to 5, but we've chosen to focus only up to 3. Because post level 3, our kids can learn and read independently, right? So our goal was to take them beyond level 3. Now, for us, we've defined those levels, and I can share that with people later if that's helpful. But if it's an organization working on it from scratch, just what does each level mean? Doing that across reading fluency, writing comprehension, and math domains, and focusing on transitioning kids to a level where they can access learning independently, right? An example would be this particular classroom. It's a grade 6 classroom in Govandi, Mumbai. It has 54 students, but currently students are at very different levels. So 11 students at level 1, 21 students at level 2 and level 3. And so for each level, we have one bridge curriculum. So we have 3 bridge curriculums, and every teacher is expected to use the level that their students are at. So the teacher in this class would use the 3 levels and would teach 11 students the content they require to get from level 1 to level 2. Okay, so that's the first principle. The second one is diagnose and focus on the most common skill breakdowns. Now, the second thing that we noticed across bridge curriculum we were seeing was that if you have a state textbook that has, say, 12 chapters, the bridge curriculum had deleted 6 chapters and said, okay, you do these 6. We are trying to reduce how much the child has to learn, but on what basis are we actually picking that? So what we did there, I'm going to give 2 examples, one in English and one in math. So for example, at level 1, right? Most of our kids who are at level 1, and we've defined this, they are able to identify these alphabets. So they're able to say this is a T, it says a sound T, this is I, it says a sound I, this is M, it says a sound M, right? What they struggle with is the ability to break and join the words. So they can't say T, I, Tim. They're only able to identify single. And so that's one skill that we're teaching them. As you move up, these kids are able to actually read this word, but they struggle with this one because here it has 2 consonants together and it has an E at the end. So they struggle with things like long vowels or the blend, TR. Right? Able to do this, they are unable to do this. Our kids at level 3 are able to read the word trime, but what they struggle with is reading the word trimester. And the difference here is that these are single syllable words, but these are multi-syllable words. So what we did is just like this. This is one particular skill that I've broken down, but we broke down like common skills across, and we said, what are the most common breakdowns from one level to the next? Let's target those skills, because if our kids learn that, they will be able to move. Similarly for math, I won't spend too much time, but just first, I need to be able to identify place value. Only then will I be able to compare. And so what level is each one? What this looks like. So the diagnosis, I'll share a very simple example. We had each of our fellows ask our students to read sets of words. So if my child can read these words, then I know that my child has the ability to read words that are 3 letter, consonant, vowel, consonant words. Right? My child might get stuck here, which tells me that even though they can read these, they struggle with when they have 2 consonants together. So it gives me that information. My child may be able to do these 2, the first 2, but struggle with the third, which is actually when my kids have to learn long vowels or vowel diagrams. So this is just one example of what it took to diagnose each kid and place them at a level. The third one, this has been an interesting one for us, is that when students are struggling, be creative, but more importantly, be consistent. What we realized is because teachers were trying to engage students very, very well-intentioned, teachers were trying to make them understand in different ways, every lesson was looking different from another. Every day was looking different from the previous one. For a child, they were coming in to learn like how to read, but they were also learning how to use 5 apps, and they were just trying to figure out, where do I have to be? What do I need to press? What needs to happen in this space, right? And so we said consistency in every lesson. The outline of every lesson needs to look the same. The outline of every day needs to look the same. And the outline of every week needs to look the same. And we do this so that a child is interested because of the content, or the story is interesting, but the method is predictable. A child's brain space is not being used to imagine or to figure out what to do. Yeah. At this point, I'm just going to pause sharing my screen, and I will share an example of how we try to bring that consistency in the actual curriculum itself. So this is a sample worksheet. You can see it says Monday worksheet, set A. Set A is level 1, right? You'll see that every single worksheet we have has the exact same format. So it has the name, the date, objectives, thinking questions. This is for the parents. And every single worksheet has the I do. It has questions. It has another passage. It has we do, which they practice together. It has another passage. It has you do, which the kids work on independently. And then it has homework. And so every single worksheet looks exactly the same. Every single week looks exactly the same. So we've divided it up into what a volunteer will do and what a fellow will do. Every fellow is assigned a volunteer. And every single week looks the same because virtually that's actually significantly hard to build, right? I will share one last example for this one, which is essentially what a week could look like, right? Now, the example that I shared earlier, say I have 3 groups, group 1, 2, and 3. Group 3 is my kids who are doing pretty well. Group 1 is the group that's struggling the most, right? The first thing in the morning, everybody attends SEL together. Post that, group 3, which is the group that's almost independent, they work independently for about 2 hours on work that I share with them on this call, right? Kids who are at level 1 and 2, they swap between English online class and math online class, right? Post this, they actually get into independent work. So they do their homework and then they close out their homework with their volunteer. A volunteer checks their homework for them. During this time, my group 3 students come for their English and math class. As a teacher, I'm spending time here. And if I'm an English teacher, I'm spending time across with each bucket, but I'm using my time really, really well every day. And every child knows that every day the same thing happens. This is the last thing I will share, and then I will end it. But we always say that it takes a village to raise a child. And I think something we realized last year was that we had a lot of people who wanted to come in, help out, support, but it was very disorganized. And so when you're virtual, even more because the child is alone and there are different people trying to help that child, right? So in our case, we have teachers, we have parents, and we have volunteers. Like I mentioned, every fellow has 2 to 3 volunteers mapped to them. What we realized is actually putting down very clearly what role each person plays. Are they equipped to do that? So are they equipped to play that role? And lastly, do our systems and structures support each person to play their role? So a simple example, I showed you the worksheet just now, but we put thinking questions as a guide for parents. I think it's a little bit unclear here, but we put thinking questions for parents to look at. Give you an example. So every worksheet has these. It's a translation of these thinking questions, which the teacher will teach in English. And then at the end, it has a summary for parents to say, you know, when my child's completed, I know what the child has read about, even if I don't actually read English. Okay? So that's one example. Another example is what I mentioned before, that every bridge curriculum has exactly what the volunteer will do. So the structure for the volunteer, the structure for the fellow, and then across the board, for every single week, we have a sample worksheet and we have a sample presentation as well that a teacher or a volunteer can use while they are teaching students. So this presentation is completely annotated. There are questions, answers, everything that a teacher needs. And so I have complete clarity on what I'm meant to be doing. I'll pause with those 4 things in mind. Just keep in mind the levels. Work to diagnose what are the breakdowns specifically. The third one is consistency. And the fourth one is getting people to help students, but support them very explicitly with. I'll just pause there.
Thank you so much, Nalika. That was really interesting. I just quickly wanted to check, does anybody have any questions about this? Actually, we would also be happy to hear if any other organizations, tried something similar, tried something different. What are your thoughts around that? So yeah, if anybody would like to put anything on the chats, or then we'll just start taking questions. Okay, there seem to be no questions in the chat as of now. I'm just looking at the questions that were sent in the past, and we could just see if any of that could be things that Nalika could sort of tell us more about. I think one of the questions that came during the registration was, in rural villages, how to restart remedial after school study support offline and online, or in a hybrid model. So like, do you have any idea of how in rural spaces this could be done? Would that be simpler? Would that be difficult? What do you think?
To be very honest, I don't have any experience working with students from rural backgrounds. What I would imagine, though, if I had to working in a different context, would be that I'd still keep the principles the same. So I would still say, okay, what are the different levels of kids, and how do we get them from one level to the next? I would still do the same thing. In some cases where we were unsure, like something that we did, like either you have a framework or you don't, right? And in places where we don't have a framework, something that we did is actually get kids and say, okay, you read. We'll observe you reading. We'll see what words are you able to read. What words are you struggling with? We'll ask you questions and see what are you able to answer and not able to answer. And then we'll make those buckets. So I guess the approach would be the same, but maybe the levels would actually be different based on the curriculum that's being followed or what the learning mastery is expected of students in different places.
Okay. I think that's about it. I think most of the other questions were around the work, the things that you've already discussed. I think there are some questions here about what's the level of TFI engagement with parents? Do they support their kids actively?
I think we've always valued the community a lot. So right from our first interaction with fellows is actually to send them into the community to meet parents and kids. So we've always valued interaction with the community a lot. I think through the past year, the levels of parent engagement and the fact that there is no other way to reach kids without reaching their parents, that became incredibly prominent through the last year, specifically for kids in elementary and middle school, right? So I think right now, when we think of our parents, we have mostly our parents who have really young children, so elementary grades 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, are extremely engaged in their learning. Something that we observe is that our middle school kids, their parents are interested, but aren't always able to keep a tab on what they're doing. So they're saying we're going for online lessons, so they're actually playing something on the phone. So that becomes a little bit tricky. And again, in secondary, it's high. So elementary and secondary engagement is quite high. And in elementary, they're also able to support children. So for really young grades, a part of like their learning will be, to sit with their parents and practice counting dal, because their parents can support them to do things like that. So wherever parents can support children academically, we try to make that possible.
Right. The next question was, are there curriculum and the framework designed by TFI open source? Is there anything that the rest of us could access? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we could share all of it actually. So for levels 1 and 2, it is actually something we can share because the texts that we use are freely available. So the texts that we use are all from Pratham and Storyweaver. We use those to make our worksheets. For level 3, because we had to get something slightly rigorous, we've actually picked a novel. But that isn't a novel that every child has access to. So that's one that we may not be able to share. But yeah, would be happy to share.
So yeah, I guess so in the feedback, so I have put the feedback form in the chat box. So please fill that feedback form and the space in the feedback form to ask us specific questions. If you require additional support, the space for you to write about that as well. And there is email ID of a contact person at TFI that y'all could reach out to in case y'all would like more support from TFI. I think the next question is around any thoughts on how to work with children where in the household there aren't anyone to support. Oh, I think this is more about first generation learners, and I think you shared a little bit on that. Pointers beyond volunteers engaging at specific time or schedule. Is there any pointers on that? Like if there's nobody available and the child's timing doesn't fit, I guess. Nikhil, is that what you mean to ask? Would you like to unmute yourself and explain your question in case that's not been answered by Nalika already?
Yeah, I'm audible, right?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, this is very specific to, so I work in very underserved geography, and it's a completely tribal demographic. So, and most of us, we work with first generation learner. So in that scenario, we do have in-person classes, which we do. Now, if I'm talking about the I do part you're highlighting, where children have to do it individually. Now, if they do not have any support, and technically we are not doing, as far as my understanding, it's not remedial. It's kind of a gap that they haven't been taught anything at all. For example, first grade child technically hasn't got an opportunity to engage in spaces. Before that, the spaces were shut. So it's not just a remedial part, but they've already lost 2 years. Now we are talking about how we can develop their foundational skill itself. And at this point of time, if you do not have anybody to support you in your household also, what did TFI think about this kind of situation? Have you developed any solutions, or what is the thought process for how do you know how we should be approaching that? So it is very specific to that.
Thank you so much for that question. So we do actually have a significant number of first generation schoolgoers at TFI as well, and we have some grade 1, grade 2 students. I think when we work with fellows and with teachers, what we share with them is that if your child can do anything independently, right, related to the topic that they're learning. So supposing they're just learning their basic alphabets, I can just give them something as simple as tracing paper, where like they just have to write the alphabet and practice. I can get them to do that independently. And then I can get them to come to class. So if they can do anything independently, get them to do that first, and then either come to an in-person or a virtual class. If you have students who are at a level where they're actually unable to do anything independently, so maybe even like holding a pencil is something that they're learning, for those students, first work with them together, like with the teacher and the student together in person or online, and then get them to practice something independently. So it just depends on what order you're working with them in. That's something that we've shared across the board with fellows. I don't know if that helps. But I think another thing that comes to mind is what we do with parents, even parents who may not be able to support their children academically, is we make sure that parents have a very, very clear understanding of the systems and procedures. So an example of that would be in some classrooms, we have fellows send an agenda every day through a voice note on WhatsApp. And what each parent has to do is each parent has to send a voice note back in their regional language saying, my child will be attending this class today. Just to share that, hey, I've understood where my child is expected to be. So that's one thing. They have classes to teach parents how to use Zoom, Google Hangouts, things like that in their regional language. So the parent may not be able to help the child actually finish their homework, but they know where their child has to be, and they know how to get their child there or how to upload homework and things like that. So that's been really helpful.
That's interesting. Thank you, Nalika, for that. I think another question was around what are some of the challenges the fellows faced in sort of implementing these methods? Were there very specific challenges that you think across the board came up, and what did you do about that?
Specific to the bridge curriculum, Prerna?
Yes, specific to the bridge curriculum.
So right now, because it's been 6 weeks, we have a couple of fellows who've actually come back, said, hey, this is challenging, that is challenging. I think the thing that they're finding the most challenging at this point is that we tried to pack a lot into the curriculum, right? In terms of you have reading fluency, you have every day a child does writing, every day a child does reading, every day math. And that's becoming challenging because sometimes there's just not enough time in the day for them to then sit with individual groups of kids. So every child is learning something that's at their level, but every teacher has to teach 3 different groups of kids in every class. And so that's something that they've shared. Something that we're thinking of doing maybe for the next time that we work on something like this is to actually reduce the number of levels. So just have like a level 1 and 2 and say, you divide your kids into 2 versus into 3, because it reduces the work. So that's one. Initially, something that folks struggled with was, when you're used to making your own lesson plans every day, you have a certain way of doing that. And then when they got the plans and the worksheets, they were just like, okay, this is very detailed. I don't think in such a detailed manner before I go and execute in class. So that was a challenge, but that's something that we've been able to work with. A third thing that people shared was that while overall they found the resources really, really helpful, there are places where they want to change certain things. So they want to contextualize either certain words or certain questions that are there, right? And so initially we had actually sent out PDFs to everybody. Now what we've done is we've said, here's the template. You can make a copy of it and you can customize it. And that was a big learning we had very early on, because people were just like, these PDFs are great, but I can't change anything on it. So small but important thing. And the last thing is just managing adults, right? As teachers, we're used to working with our kids. But if I'm saying, okay, there's a role for your volunteers, there's a role for your parents, you have to hold them accountable. I think most of our teachers haven't worked with and managed adults before in their lives. So that's something new that they have to learn.
That makes sense. Thank you so much. I think another important question was around what has been the approach on assessments? Has that changed a bit? And what do you suggest for organizations that work with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I can share my screen and check. I get very excited when there are content-based questions because I have so much to share. But just give me a second. So essentially, what has changed is the frequency of the assessment. So that's one. And the second is the specificity of the assessment. So what you'll notice is every week, right? So this is one sample of a bridge curriculum. There's a lot on the screen, just follow my cursor. Okay, you will not get lost. But so there's a bridge curriculum. You have however many weeks, right? So it goes on for 12 weeks. You have the role of the volunteer, the role of the fellow, and you'll see different kinds of objectives across. You'll also see words that they need to learn for the week, or sight words, for example. And you'll also see writing topics that they need to be working on through this week, right? So you have different things in the week. What we've done is every alternate week, there is an assessment, and this assessment tests all the specific skills that have been there for the past 2 weeks. So it looks like this. So you'll notice all of the objectives and skills that were taught there over here. And then you have the assessment. So every 2 weeks, an assessment is administered. The difference is that generally we provide these assessments only either once a unit or at mid-year. So at mid-year, a fellow gets this or a teacher gets this, and then they're like, okay, so this is what it's going to look like. I'll look at the past papers, I'll teach accordingly. And a teacher is expected to create their own assessments every week or every alternate week. But that doesn't always necessarily happen because of the amount of things that there is to be done. So what we said is, if we break it up into smaller chunks, provide you much more frequent formative assessments, that will add up to the summative assessment at the end. And so actually assessments has, like, we've worked on that considerably. I hope that helps.
Yes, and that means that you had also done a lot of assessment. You did more assessments than regular. I think that's the change that's happened, and that's a good learning for everybody. Everybody, I have put the feedback form in the chat box. Please start filling that in so that we can have some feedback on how we can make these sessions better. There are a few more questions, I think 2 specifically. Could you share some specifics about number of hours children can be or should be engaged online? And what are some of the best practices? What is something that, you know, TFI thought of while thinking about what is the number of hours per session and in total?
So, I mean, to be honest, there are very many answers to that question. Every organization that I come across over the past year has different responses to that question. You know, kids shouldn't be spending so much time online, or some say, hey, but this is just the only way and they're going to be so behind when they come back. I think the way that we've approached it at TFI has been slightly on the higher end, where we have said like a minimum of 18 hours per week at minimum. That's something that we encourage for fellows. So that's actually not much. It's 3 hours per day, including Saturdays, but that's a minimum. So we also encourage fellows to teach. Actually, it's not about fellows teaching. Sorry, I'll take that back. It's not about fellows teaching for those many hours. It's about children learning for those many hours, right? And so that could be in any form. It could be like some fellows, for example, have chosen to say, I'm going to be dropping off books at a school. You're going to pick up the book and just going to read for half an hour every day. But that's included in that child's learning time because they're engaging with something academic. As such, we know that children are learning at all points of time during the day. It's just how much of it is focused on what they need to learn to get from one level to the next. In short, the answer is a minimum of 18 hours, but more than that if possible. And for higher grades, definitely more than that.
I think I missed some question here. I think
SEL.
as Dhanashree shared, this pandemic hampered the mental health. So in the SEL, what kind of things covered or prioritized in SEL morning session?
Right. So the SEL bridge curriculum is not actually based on level. It is based on like elementary, middle school, secondary. It's a common pack of resources that people can use. And those are just curated from everywhere. The reason that we've not prescribed something particular for SEL is because we've said you need to know what your kids need the most at this point of time. There are groups of kids, for example, who are most nervous and scared about not being able to come back to school. Or there are kids who are really stressed out about the board and the ambiguity there. If that's the need, then work on that. But we've given resources across a spectrum of like some things as basic as just identifying my feelings and communicating them in a responsible way, all the way from that to like dealing with like trauma in secondary and or things even like things that I see around me. Like if I see any form of abuse around me, how do I work with that? Whom do I communicate to? Things like that. So it's an array of activities, but teachers get to choose what's most suitable for their children.
I'm just checking if there are any other questions in the
last one.
Yes, I'm checking if there's okay. Have you explored different methods for interactive learning? How difficult is it doing it online?
Could the whoever
Deepashri, are you
elaborate
on call? Could you elaborate a bit?
Yeah, hi, Nalika. My question is just, because especially if you want to do some kind of, you want to draw a picture, you ask the kids answer, and then those kind of things. How well does your methodology work, especially considering we want to now bridge learning gaps and accelerate their learning in a short period of time? And, so it's just a generic question, especially for online. What platforms would you use for making learning interactive? Does TFI's platform have specific solutions for that?
Got it. Right. As of now, most of our fellows are teaching using Zoom itself. So the most used things, they keep it quite simple. And that's for the reason that we try to say, don't try to get in too many like structures and models and methods, just keep it really simple. Some of our most effective teachers would just use Zoom. They use their share screen. They always come in with a presentation so that it becomes visually fun and interactive for kids. They use the annotate tools quite a bit. They use breakout rooms so that it becomes interactive for students to talk to one another. And then they use Google Forms as an assessment paired with Google Classroom. So those are the most commonly used things.
Do you have like Snap Quiz or something which you can, give them? Any tools for those?
Not really. We just stick to Google Forms for now because it's easier, I think, for kids also, because what we realize is our kids struggle to move from one app to another on their phone during a lesson. So we try to keep everything on that one screen for them. And then in breakout rooms, they work independently, but something that we also do and we encourage fellows to do is to get kids to write, because they haven't practiced writing enough, right? So we get kids to write and we ask kids to flip their phone camera and show the teacher what they're writing. So that's actually one of the best ways I've seen to get a gauge of what they're learning. Yeah.
That makes sense. And I guess like not adding too many things into the equation and asking kids to like use too many apps makes a lot of sense, because then they're spending, like you said earlier, spending more time just figuring out those apps before they can actually understand. So that's really nice. I think Nikhil had one last question about elaborating a bit more on regional or vernacular languages beyond Hindi in content instruction, and like what did TFI do about that? How did you devise this strategy? Yeah, do you think we have some time to talk about that? We have last 3 minutes. But of course, Nikhil, I think let's get in touch otherwise as well and speak more. And yeah, but go ahead, Nalika, last point. And people, please fill the feedback form. Sorry.
Yeah, so mostly we encourage fellows to teach in a full immersion model. Again, very different theories available on, do you have bilingual instruction? Do you have, but we mostly encourage fellows to teach completely in English. So we don't use as much regional or vernacular language in class. The rationale there being that that's literally the only space where kids do have access to English and to learning English. And sometimes what we've noticed is when we say bilingual, especially online, what ends up happening is it's so difficult to communicate that you end up speaking much more of the regional language than English, right? So what we noticed happening in some places is people just translating the whole text versus teaching the child how to read the text. So those are a couple of things that we notice. However, what we try to do is in written form, like I showed you the worksheet, we try to provide the regional script in case a parent can read or is able to read, for them to support the children at home. So that's something that we do try.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yes. So in the interest of time, if there's any other, questions that you have, please feel free to put it in the chat, in the feedback form, not the chat box anymore, in the feedback form, so that I can sort of get back to you on those questions, and then we can simply share those questions and answers from TFI to everybody, so that everyone has access to it. All right. Thank you so much, Nalika, Dhanashri, and Samatha from TFI for coming, giving us your time, sharing your valuable inputs on this topic. This is really important for all of us to discuss. And I'm sure a lot of organizations are doing a brilliant job. And this is lighting some more bulbs inside them to like come up with more ideas. So thank you so much. Thank you for coming, and thank you everybody. It was lovely having you all here.
And thank you, Grena, for your last webinar with us as a facilitator. We look forward to see you as a participant next time. Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Anna, do you require me to stay back for anything? Should I drop off?
Yeah, sure. You can drop off. Thank you so much, Nalika.
Do
Take
share the
care.
form response.
Yes,
Bye,
I
Abhijit.
will. Bye.
Thanks, Nalika.